And see, there it is. He controls it that way. If he doesn't want me to say anything, he just turns it off. We're done. Good. Anybody got a little mold behind their ears lately or anything like that? It's kind of seemed like it's rained the last few days, hadn't it? Just a little bit. Just a little bit. But, and all. It's all good. Oh, it's good. We'll be, a few weeks from now, we'll be saying, man, I wish it would rain. I wish it would rain. But it's all good. And if it's not swirling around in circles or throwing those big rocks of ice from the sky, then I can take the rain. I can take the rain. Okay. All right, who's sending me texts in the middle of service? Okay. Jenny Lou, you're not supposed to send me texts in the middle of service, okay? Okay. No, you told me you were going to send that. All right. Glad you're here this evening. It is time for us to begin. I'm sure if you're maybe somebody's watching online, good to see you, or good to see me. Anyway, glad that you can see us and glad we don't have to see you. Sorry about that. All right. More seriously, let me think about announcements. I was told, before I forget this, for VBS, don't forget, 20 to 24 ounce bottles, empty. Those plastic bottles. You got like 20 ounce Coke bottles or something like that, I guess. What? Water bottles, or I guess, yeah, just 20. No water. I don't think they want water in them or anything now. I'm hoping they're just needing the plastic bottles. 20 to 20. That was my understanding when I came in here. 20 or 24 ounce bottles. Okay, if that's not right, then I have no idea. And if you haven't looked, before you leave, look down the hallway over here and see some of the work that was done. I mean, there were people crawling all over this place the other day. I guess that was yesterday, wasn't it? And all down here making all kinds of noise, no, they really were down here working hard and doing a bunch of stuff. If you look down that little hallway in the newer part of the building, it's really neat what's going to work for VBS coming up, and that's coming up in a hurry. Okay, well, let's see. What else do I need to mention? Of course, I guess everybody's thinking about it and recognizing what happened in Uvalde, Texas. Terrible. I mean, I can't even imagine that kind of thing. You don't send your child to school and expect a gunman to come into the school, in an elementary school especially. But anyway, what a horrible, tragic thing. And I know you've got those people in your thoughts and prayers. Other announcements, I was trying to think of what else have we got? We got anything special? I mean, there's some in our bulletin. Just keep them in mind and everything. If you still got a copy of the bulletin, if you didn't make an airplane out of it and fly it away, then you might still have a bulletin out there. For some reason, we're not getting them online. I mean, it's not on our website, and we're going to rectify that one of these days and all, but that's where we are. Well, let's have a prayer, and then we'll begin our study this evening. Dear God, our Father, again, thank you for the blessings of life, for the rain that's come, and we know that what it brings and how it blesses us. And Father, we're thankful that we haven't had the storms that have done so much damage and everything. And we think about places where it has happened, and we pray for those people. But especially at this time, we're thinking about those families in Texas. And we pray, Father, that in some way they may find some peace and comfort, but the tragedy that's there, we hope there can be healing and people will be there to assist. And Father, that their dependency on you may recognize a greater strength than maybe they even imagine they have. Thank you for our time together, and as we study together this evening, help us to be a people of making good choices and recognizing how they are in our lives and how they affect our lives. Keep us safe always, Father, in your care, and may we always recognize how fortunate we are to be here and to be among one another and to share this time together. In Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, here's where we are. We are at study number 7, the choice to do the unacceptable. I threw those titles in there. That may not be the title you would put on it, but you get an idea. And if you looked at the notes earlier that were sent out by email, you know where we're going this evening. We're going to go to Genesis 29. We're not going to read that entire section from 15 to 30. Really, we could read going back into chapter 28 and 29 especially, because what we're talking about this evening is the story of Jacob. And you can go back to that, and we'll talk a little bit in a moment about the reason why he is where he is and so forth. But you can go back into chapter 27 and different things that happen and how this thing unfolds with Jacob, and it comes down to the point. We know the struggles with Esau, but let's look at our scripture this evening. We're going to look at just a section of that. Didn't fit on the screen very well, but if you've got one of the papers, it should be on the paper in front of you. I just didn't want to take up two screens with it. I was screen saving. You ever heard of a screensaver? That didn't work very well, did it? Okay. Just kind of flew over their heads. You and I got it, though. It's okay. Okay, let's look at this. Genesis 29, look at verses 20 through 25. It says, "So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel. They seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, 'Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her.' And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, 'What is this that you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?'" So this is just a small section of the story, and I think many of you have read this story, and if you haven't, take time to read it. It is a soap opera story. It's a kind of a fun soap opera story, if you will, of a family and a mixed deal. And Laban is evidently quite a character. He's pretty mercenary in many regards. If you go back to the time that Abraham sent his servant to get a wife for Isaac, when Laban, who was then not the head of the household, but when Laban was the brother of who was going to be Isaac's wife, Rebekah, he was the brother. When he saw the gold that she was given in all of this, he got pretty excited about the potential there. And so we get kind of a picture of Laban early on. This guy's kind of mercenary in a way. And we find that in his relationship with Jacob as well. So bringing the story up, and I think most of you are somewhat aware of the story. Jacob and Esau have their struggles. We dealt with some of that and the choices that were made there. And then ultimately we've got Isaac sending Jacob away to get a wife, partly to appease his wife, sends Jacob away. And of course this saves him from his brother Esau, who's waiting in the wings to kill him as soon as Isaac dies. So that was going to be a wait. That's going to be a while before that was going to happen, but he doesn't know that yet. But Jacob is sent away to her family, which he ultimately finds his way to Laban, finds his way to that household. And there, as he is there and trying to find them, of course, Rachel comes out, and she is there, and Jacob is there, and the watering of the animals and so forth, and all of this takes place, and we've got some excitement taking place. So he goes home with them, and he begins to live with them. And Jacob says, I'll work for you. And Laban's saying, yeah, I'll put you to work, but what are your wages going to be? And Jacob says, I tell you what, I got an idea for you. I'll serve you 7 years for your daughter. I'll serve you 7 years for your daughter. And that's where we pick up the story. Laban says, sounds like a winner to me. But he does name the daughter. He says, I'll serve you 7 years for Rachel. Now then, a quick show of hands. How many of you guys would have done that? Don't lie. You're not supposed to, as an elder, tell lies. No. No, it's quite a deal. I'm making fun. He would have doubled that. $1 later. But, this is an unusual situation for our time and our place to see this kind of thing. We look at this and we say, what are you talking about? Working 7 years and, Well, recognize that what he doesn't have. He doesn't have a dowry. He's come on his own. He doesn't come with an entourage. He doesn't come with all these gifts. He's come by himself, and he says, I tell you what, here's what I'll do. And so this seems like a reasonable deal. Seems like a reasonable deal to him. Seems like a reasonable deal to his future father-in-law. Okay. Okay, that is a really good question, and I think we need to, let's address that question in a minute, but we go to that point, and we've made all the deal. Of course, there is that beautiful line in here, isn't there? Don't you love that line? It seemed but a few days. Anybody in here ever been lovesick? Did it seem like a few days to you? You know, a few days seem like years. This is kind of backward. He's just saying he was willing, and that's a statement. He was willing to do this readily because, he was so anxious and desirous for her. But that leads us to where Blue was taking us, doesn't it? So it comes time for the wedding. They have the big party. This is typical. The father of the bride throws a big banquet, invites all the important people together, and they eat and they drink for days. Now, it does not, you're exactly right, it does not say that he was drunk. The only thing that I can offer to you that my thought is, and somebody else might have a better thought in that, was that he couldn't see. It's dark. I know. It's still retarded. What did you say? That's not politically acceptable. I know what you're saying. It just, I've got an idea he probably had been drinking. That's possible. I don't know. Your Blue's exactly right. It doesn't say he was, but you say, wouldn't he have known? There may have been some real similarities between them. Obviously, Rachel was the more attractive, physically attractive. And as you say, he saw her in form and face. She was a very attractive person. What that meant at that time, I don't know for sure. But somehow, even at that night, he was deceived. They could have been fairly close in size and everything. I do not know. I've got to tell you, I wasn't there. I didn't meet Laban, so I just want you to know that for sure. Go ahead. Typically, you're exactly right. Typically, in many of the cultures, and probably then, she would have been heavily covered at the time she's brought to him. And you realize in the nights and in many of those tents and so forth, there was not lighting to really see very well and all. But Fran's probably right. He should have been sharper than that, but he wasn't. Evidently, wasn't very sharp, and maybe it was from all the partying that had been going on. Because these weddings were not. You'd go down and you have this, and you go and have your reception, and toast the bride and so forth, and then the bride and groom run away. That wasn't the way it was. They went on for days. Go back and read about Samson's wedding situation, and you get a little better picture about what's going on with some of these people. So that it's interesting. And I think if you see he might be a little inebriated. It's very dark. She might be veiled and covered and so forth, and to a great degree, a mistake could be made and all. Maybe he was just tired. I don't know. I don't find an easy excuse for it, but it did happen. And so, this brings us back to choice number one, though. Let's go back to it, because I'm sorry, I didn't get into all this, did I? I need to buzz the thing anyway, don't I? Okay. As talking about it was common and often expected to find a wife from within your family or tribe. So that may seem odd to us that he was sent to the family, but that's the way you did it then. And you kept it within the family, within the tribe quite often. And he does find his way back to the home of his mother's brother. And so that's where it is. Then we've got choice number one. As I said, they make this agreement. They make this agreement. Now, something that comes to my mind is Isaac was a very wealthy man. Why didn't he say, let me see my father and the family will provide? Instead, he does this on his own. Why wouldn't he have done that? Why wouldn't he have done that? Okay. Okay. Yes, and that does come out in this story too. Yes, it does. Yeah, her father says, wait a minute, in our culture, we don't marry off the younger one before the older one. But shouldn't that have been known 7 years ago? So there was a little deception going on here anyway from the very beginning of this thing. And that gets back to, I think, Laban's character in this. But I would think that Jacob would have been aware of that. As you said, he was not. His elevator didn't go all the way to the top. What? He didn't read the fine print on that. It happened so quickly. That's 7 years. I mean, how did he miss out on it? Okay, that's what okay, yeah. Even if he had paid, it might have come out just the same way. But my thought is, why bargain for a 7-year thing when your father has all these animals and wealth of the land out there? He's a prince. Why not? Why not go back to, that goes back to my question. Why not go back to your dad? Go ahead.
Well, after what happened, he might not have felt like he was in Isaac's dream.
Okay. That's a good point. He because he had deceived his father, he may not have felt like he could go and depend on his father. It might not have been, as you say, in his good graces. And that could have been a kind of tenuous thing at this point and all. Even though they had sent him to get a bride, then it still might not have been the best situation. So that's a very good point. He might have been a little hesitant right there. So very good. Yeah, Dwayne, you had something else. Okay. 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 And that is a good point. Yes, they send him off and all, and maybe with a certain amount of expectation that they will not see him again. He's going, and realize, while we look at the map and we may say, man, that's not that very much of a journey. But that was quite a journey for them in that time. And to go there and to turn around and come back and with a wife, they would have probably expected if he goes and gets a wife, it's going to take time for him to build up enough to come back again, which is really what does happen in this case. But may not have thought it'd be quite this long, I guess. But I don't know. But that's a good point. Yes, sir.
Do you think Jacob needed some growing up? Remember, Esau was the guy that was always out hunting and
Okay. 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 Yes, Jacob may have needed a little growing time and a little growing up and an experience, and maybe this was somewhat rash on his part to make this kind of a deal even, but he did. And in some ways, I think we do see that he does grow up a little bit. But I think you make a very good point in that maybe there was a certain amount of hesitancy, maybe even a little bit of immaturity in him, because when it comes down to that point, well, we'll come back to that in just a minute. Anyway, but he does not depend on his father. He does depend on himself. He's going to do this himself, and maybe that's a part of it. I'm going to show you. I'm going to do this myself. And so some of that may be in here. I don't know. But if we notice his attitude, he's willing to do this. He's glad to do it. And he says, it was nothing because I love her so much. She was well worth every bit of that. Now, guys, you can go home and tell your brides how much they're worth to you in that regard. Okay. So that was choice number one, and he goes along with that choice. let's jump down to choice number 2, which seems to be the one we keep pointing towards more than any other. It's when Laban switches the payment and Leah is substituted for Rachel. Now, how they pulled it off, we're guessing at some of that, how they pull all that off. But you can see Laban's wheels are turning. I don't know how real that was. You point out the older, the younger daughters. Maybe that was a very real custom. I don't know. I don't know for sure. Could well have been and all. But it should have been something, could have, should have, would have been something that they all should have known about, and Laban should have said from the beginning, we can probably do this, but only if Leah gets married first. And so instead, he just kind of slips things in a little bit differently, okay? Wasn't that breaking the Mosaic law? That would have been, of course, that doesn't exist yet, but there were not, it seems at this point in the patriarchal times, there were not quite the same restrictions on marriages and so forth at this point. There were, because, we've got Abraham married to his half-sister and so forth, and I think that was not a totally uncommon situation. And to marry 2 sisters. We don't know a lot about the multiple marriages at this time and so forth. But you're right, later you don't do that because that ends up with a rivalry and so forth. And that seems to be in the Mosaic law. But that is a thought, and they bring that in. And there is some rivalry that comes up later in this, of course. So for whatever reason Laban uses, he slips in Leah. Does he think I'm going to get more service out of this guy? Maybe, because what does he immediately tell? When Jacob confronts him about it, what does he tell him? Well, I had to get her married first, so we have to do the older one first, but you'll serve me 7 more years. What would you want to say to that? I know what I'd want to say. Not a chance, buddy. I already earned her. You want to give me the other one? That's the deal. This is a used car. I guess it's not a used car lot we're dealing with here, is it? You want to throw that in, that's on you and everything. Did you ever get down to the end, you're bargaining for a car or something in one of those lots somewhere, new car, old car, whatever, and you're bargaining with them and they say, okay, and then there's going to be this fee on top of it. Because they know 9 times out of 10, somebody will say, okay, we'll add $50 or $100, or we got to add $150 here for this or that, car prep, document fees, or whatever it is. And maybe 8 or 9 out of 10 will not say, take that out of your end. If that's really true, take it out of your end. Make sure you do that next time. Don't let them do that to you. Never mind. Anyway, it's all fun and games until they won't let you have the car. But for whatever reason, Jacob goes along with this. This is choice number 2. Okay. So in essence, he works 14 years. Now, he fulfills his time with Leah, and then Rachel is given to him under the agreement that he would work he doesn't have to work 7 more years before Rachel gets to be his wife, it appears. But she gets to be his wife early on, but he has to make the commitment to work for those 7 more years. That's an interesting thing to me, and that just seems quite foreign to me, but it is quite foreign. But that's the way it worked, and I think it makes us wonder a little bit about Jacob and the strength of his character. Yes, ma'am. Okay, sorry. If he had gotten, okay, it would have gone back home earlier. Yeah. That's a good point. If he'd been able to bargain for her, get her immediately, getting Rachel, and then just turned around and gone home, he may have faced a much worse situation at home if he'd gone so quickly. And maybe there's a certain amount of providential hold back here so that time allows for even more. It's a good thought. Good thought. I want everybody to notice I said Jenny Lou had a good thought. Very good. No, that is really, seriously, that is a very nice thought. Trey, you had something to... Okay. Okay, good. I was waiting for that because you realize, as she's pointing out, Jacob may have recognized, well, I've been a little underhanded in some of my dealings in the past, especially with my father and so forth in that regard. Yeah, so, this is probably not that foreign to him in that sense, okay? Trey, you had something. Okay, good. The trickster is tricked. Good. Okay. That's why I say this is kind of a soap opera story. It's really kind of fun to read it and the back and forth and who's doing what to who and when and how and everything. And it's going this way. Then it comes back at you and so forth. So it's really kind of a fun story in that regard if you just kind of look at it that way. But I wouldn't doubt that there's a certain amount of providential involvement in this situation and God working it out. Yeah, Dwayne? Okay. Okay. All right. I think, yeah, it is. When you see how it unfolds later, Jacob comes out in the better end of this in many regards, and Laban comes out the loser. You see how angry Laban's sons become about the whole situation. And then even God intervenes and says to Laban, don't touch him. Don't touch him. Don't go there and do any harm to him. So it's quite a story in that regard. But I keep thinking each time, and we're really thinking about especially the choices that were made in this regard, because Jacob's called upon to make a couple of pretty fundamental choices in his life at this point. One in choosing Rachel, making the bargain and the choice to do with within their culture, to work for her. And then when confronted with the deception, he still goes along and makes a choice to cooperate and put 7 more years within this. And so he consents to that contract. Was it a forced submission? We've got a lot of thoughts in regard to that. But consider the results of his choices. And that goes back to some of what you've already been saying. Consider the results of his choices. Esau has time to build up his empire, develop who he is, so he's not so angry with his brother again. In fact, when the time comes, and 20 years passing, he's ready to see his brother again and anxious for that. And he's a man of wealth and property by that time as well. And so it all kind of works out in a fairly good way for him in that regard. And he ends up with all these sons, which then we recognize the tribes of Israel. So a lot of this comes into play, and especially we recognize, and I get back to that providential aspect of it again, because where are we going with all this? We're going towards Jesus. All of this is pointing towards the coming of Jesus. And that's where the lineage becomes very important, and the lineage of Jesus coming through, of course, the tribe of Judah and so forth in this regard. So Jacob and his choices that are made. Again, I think we talked about it a week ago. We were talking about Jacob, and I said, I kind of get the impression Jacob was a little bit of a weenie in a way. Is that a good, you understand what I mean by that? Just not a strong personality, willing to be manipulated by others in a way. Remember, it took his mother to get him to deceive his father. He's afraid of his brother in a way, and yet he's still bold enough to bargain for the birthright and so forth. But when we see him dealing with Laban, it doesn't seem like that shrewd of a deal on the outset. And then even later, we see some of the actions of him. He's not a man that is very forward and powerful in his presence, it seems, in a way. And yet then we come back to he's very much in charge of his sons and his expectations of them in some other ways. So I don't know whether I've got a good picture of him or not, but it seemed like there's just kind of an interesting up and down about this man and all. And we see it. But these choices, I think, tell us something about his character. So that brings us down to this and on some of the questions we've got before us, and I wanted to get through it. Unless there's something else you want to add to the story or look at it, and we're just really looking at part of Jacob's story at this point. Go ahead. Okay. Does that mean that Laban was an idol worshiper? Yes and no. If you read the very end of the book of Judges, you remember the story of Micah and the idols that are there. Some of you have read that story. You'll come across it if you haven't. And it does not necessitate. Sometimes they were just wrong about their approach. The idol, they did not necessarily see the idol as a god, but as something to help them focus on God sometimes. We understand, of course, later, no graven images and so forth, part of their law. But in all likelihood, it probably was something of an idol worshiper. Yes, it is. And you realize that we don't know about Abraham's family prior to God calling Abraham and anything about their relationship to God. Abraham's relationship to God is the one we recognize when God calls him at the point of 75 years of age. In fact, we don't know anything about Abraham to speak of prior to God calling him in Genesis 12. Was he a devoted worshiper of God and God only? In fact, remember what Jacob says after his dream and vision. They're on his way to Laban's home. When he awakens, he says, God, if you'll take me there and bring me home safely, then you will be my God. Was there some involvement with other deities of their mind or whatever prior to this? It's possible. I don't know exactly. We don't have enough there, but that they stole the household idols would mean that there was at least the idea of idol worship among them. Yeah. Whether they saw that as a representation of God or if they just saw that idol as a god itself. Does that make sense? I don't know. I can't answer that completely. But I would not say no, he was not an idol worshiper, but I can't guarantee that. Okay. Somebody might have a better idea on that. Okay. It helps them represent that to them. You know, there's a story later when the Israelites have conquered the land and they are, early in the Judges, they were, those tribes, the half tribe of Manasseh and so forth, and they're far away, and they set up an altar after the pattern of the altar, and some of the people have seen this and they recognize this, say, these people are turning from God and worshiping improperly this idol. Well, they go and find out, no, this is just to remind us, like you're saying, this is just to remind us of God and our proper worship and who has brought us this far. And the same thing of a monument that would be set up of stones out of the river, or Gideon's ephod and little things along the way. People would sometimes abuse them, but they were not intended to be used that way necessarily. So I don't know. I don't know if that all makes a whole lot of sense to you or not. If you went to sleep in the middle of that, you didn't miss a whole lot, okay? Okay, so Jacob, we see where he is. Got a couple of choices he's made. He makes those choices, and I think it tells us a lot about his character. So again, very quickly, question number one was, what are some of the background factors that motivated Jacob to choose Rachel? What are some of the background, what are some of the factors involved in his choice of Rachel? Okay, one is superficial beauty. She was the Esther of her time, wasn't she? Okay. He saw her and she was beautiful, but you said blood relation, relative. They were connected, and that was appropriate in that regard because that's where he was sent by his parents to find this right. So sees her, and she's good looking. Now, is it a problem to be good looking? Nobody in here is saying, no, it's never been a problem to me. I'm just kidding. Anyway, but that it should not be seen as a bad thing, but she was attractive, at least in his eyes. She was attractive, and her sister was not seen as attractive. But those would be some of the primary factors in that, in the choice that's made there. And of course, she doesn't have much say in this choice. Her brother, being the head of the family, has the choice in this matter. Okay, good. Any other thoughts on that? The one other thing is that you remember how angry his mother was about Esau marrying the Canaanite women, the Gentile women. And so picking somebody that would be approved by his mother would be a very important factor to him. Okay? All right, question number two. In an age where a wife could be purchased for a much smaller price, why would Jacob be willing to commit so much? Even if he didn't go to his father, even if he didn't go back and look at that, why would he be willing to commit so much? 7 years would seem to be a large payment for a wife. Why? Love. Oh, love conquers all. I think you're probably on a good track with that. Love does make us do what might seem at other times and places to seem to be foolish, but well, let's see. Jacob lives to be, what does he live to be, 130? Something, I can't remember. You'd have to get over to the Exodus. You'd have to get over later in Genesis, not to the end of Genesis, near the end of Genesis, to get that. But I forget exactly how old it was. It seemed like it was 130 something, if I remember right. I'll have to go look at that number again. You bet during those 7 years it was a very long time? Does 7 years seem like a long time to us? Regardless of how long you think you're going to live, I still think 7 years is quite a bit of time when a wife could be purchased for an animal or two. You could go trade an ox for a wife. You know, that brings up all kinds of thoughts when I say that. Can you trade a wife for an ox? No, what did you say? Yeah, my wife's not in here, so it's okay. I'm just kidding. But my point is just simply that generally you could do it much cheaper. Could he have done it more cheaply? Could he have offered, I'll work for you a year, 2 years? That's still quite a bit of time. I'll help you build your flock up to a certain number or whatever, you know. Okay. Okay, the number 7 is a very full number, a complete number, and is a very important number. You know, and I may have told you the story, but somewhere I've still got the old Reader's Digest in there, and is the story of, and I can't remember the fellow's name, it was an island story, and his 7-cow wife. 7-cow wife. He traded he traded the father 7 cows for the wife. And most people thought he was crazy for doing that, because to many of them she had seemed not to be worthy of that. But you know what he said? And the writer of the story is telling about when he saw the wife, she just looked beautiful. But the guy wanted her to know how much she was worth to him. And when you tie in that line that 7 years seemed as nothing, maybe he wanted her to know how much she was worth to him. I can't verify that. You look skeptical. Just a thought. Just a thought. It may not be a good one, but it is a thought. So just think about that and all. So we'll leave it at that for right now. But I think, why would he have done it? He wanted to make sure he got her, I think. He was infatuated. You said love conquers all. I think it's got to be. He's willing to do this, and so that's what it is. And there's another side to this as well. Realize he's got a place to live and to be, in a sense, taken care of, because he doesn't own anything, and he's got a place and all of that for this time while he's doing this. Yes, he's got to work himself silly, but there we go. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. That's a good point. Yes, during the time he spends there, he was able to build up something, and I think somebody else was pointing that out a little bit too, and that pointing in that direction. You're exactly right. He was able to accomplish a lot in the time that he was there with Laban and provide much more readily. And when you read about how much he sends out to his brother, when he's headed back and he sends out ahead of him to his brother, he sends a lot of stuff to his brother. And that's just a portion of what he's got. So he does very well during the time that he is there. And so he would be able to, I mean, if he had just left and gone, they say, okay, honey, we got to walk home, and there's not going to be any food on the trip. Okay. I'm just kidding. Enough said about that. All right. Question number 3. When he realized the deception of Laban, Jacob seemed passive. Why did he just accept that instead of being demanding? Because he wanted Rachel? I think you're probably exactly right. He wanted to make sure he got Rachel. That's how badly he wanted. Love conquers all. 14 years. If 7 years is nothing, 14 years is nothing as well. Roy, 14 years is nothing as well. It's okay. I think you're all on a good track of that. All right. Number 4, real quick. What does it tell us about Jacob's character in that he chose or was willing to pay twice for the agreement? What does it tell us about him in that he was willing to pay twice for this agreement? He is seriously smitten. He's got a lot of determination. Yeah. But he's committed. And whatever it takes, even if it takes more. You've probably been there before where you ended up you get into something and it costs you a lot more than you thought in the beginning. And you kind of get to that point of no return, so to speak. Not that he wanted out of this, but you say, okay. See, that's what my wife has been stuck with me so long. We're past that point of no return now. She wouldn't even get a nickel for turning in this old pop bottle. But anyway, I think you're on a good track there. All right, number 5, because we're about out of time here. Number 5, how do we determine? That's it. How do we determine when to accept and when to contest that we have been wronged? When do we accept and when do we contest when we feel like we've been wronged? There's obviously deception that's gone on here with Jacob. When do we do that? When do we just say, okay? Good thought. When that wronging affects somebody other than me. In other words, I can absorb this personally, but if this had done harm to somebody else, and as you said, he's going to get Rachel anyway, so maybe it works. Okay. What about us? Is there anything else? I thought that was a good answer, but a good thought. Anything else in that regard? Do you know when to react or when to accept? It's hard, isn't it?
When I think about it, I think, what choice did he really have? There was the father, there was the brothers. He was living in their house. Does he have a real
Good point.
big choice to make? Plus, if he, as we said, if he goes home, he's got a brother that's waiting for him, ready, he thinks, to take his life. So I don't think he had a very big choice. And I think we see that he's a very patient man.
Okay. I think you're thinking, and that's good, because this is what it gets down to. Sometimes you've got to think through the process. If I do this, what's going to be the result? If I follow through with this, and he did not have a bunch of good choices. As you said, he can stay here, and he's got a place and everything else. If he doesn't, he's been depending on these people. He's out. So what is he going to do? And like you said, his brother's still ready to kill him and so forth. So, I think that's what we get down to. Before you react, think. Think about it. Have you ever gotten home from the McDonald's drive-thru and they didn't put your fries in your bag? Did you want to run back down there and yell at them at the McDonald's? Did you do that for one bag of fries? Just something to think about. I'm just asking. Okay, and I know our time is up, so I'm going to quit right there. But just something to take home and think about it. How far should we choose to allow ourselves to be pushed when we know we have fulfilled our part honorably? When do we sink our feet in and say, "No, I'll move no more"? Or when do we allow that? It's a good point. I think some of it goes back to what Marty was saying a while ago. Others might be involved. You think about what Jesus said. Somebody slaps you on one cheek. Do you just let them, sometimes you'll let them slap you on the other cheek as well. I will say it's all right to duck. Jesus didn't say that, but I think it's all right to duck. Okay? Listen, think about it and think about the choices and the things he was facing. I think it's a very good thing. Think about how they affect the choices that we make as we deal with things that come our way. Thank you very much. Very good thoughts this evening. Appreciate y'all being in class.